So I can't decide whether this is cowardice or courage. But up on Facebook yesterday, the guy who wrote Con Air and Gone in 60 Seconds, a new movie that's coming out, Beautiful Girls, his name is Scott Rosenberg, and on his Facebook page, and I'm going to delete some of the language, but he wrote one of the most powerful posts I think I've ever read. He said, so, yeah, we need to talk about Harvey. I was there for a big part of it. From what, 1994 to the early 2000s? Something like that. Certainly the golden age. The Pulp Fiction, Shakespeare in Love, Clerks, Swingers, Scream, Good Will Hunting, English Patient, Life is Beautiful. You know, those years. Harvey and Bob made my first two movies, and they signed me to an overall deal. Then they bought that horror script of mine about the 10 plagues for a lot of money. They also bought that werewolf biker script, the one that nobody else liked but was my personal favorite. And they were going to publish my novel. They anointed me. They made it so other studios thought I was the real deal. They gave me my career. I was barely 30. I was sure I had struck gold. They loved me, these two brothers, who reinvented the cinema, and who were fun and tough and didn't give an East Coast F about all the slick ones out in L.A., the glory days in Tribeca, the old cramped offices, the wonderful gang of executives and assistants, and the filmmakers who were doing repeat business. The brothers wanted to create a family of film, and they did just that. We looked forward to having our meetings there, meetings that would turn into plans, that would turn into raucous nights out on the town. Simply put, OG Miramax was a blast. So yeah, I was there. And let me tell you one thing, and let's be perfectly clear about one thing. Everyone effing knew. Not that he was raping. No, that we never heard. But we were certainly aware of a certain pattern of overly aggressive behavior that was rather dreadful. We knew about the man's hunger, his fervor, his appetite. There was nothing secret about his voracious rapacity, like a gluttonous ogre out of the Brothers Grimm, all couched in vague promises of potential movie roles. And it should be noted that there were many who actually succumbed to his bulky charms willingly, which surely must have only impelled him to cast his fetid net even wider. But like I said, everyone effing knew. And to me, if Harvey's behavior was the most reprehensible thing one could imagine, a not-so-distant second is the current flood of sanctimonious denial and condemnation that now crashes upon those shores in gloppy tides of BS righteousness, because everyone effing knew. And do you know how I know this is true? Because I was there. I saw you. I talked with you about it. You, the big producers, you, the big directors, you, the big agents, you, the big financiers, you, the big rival studio chiefs, you, the big actors, the big actresses, you, the big models, you, the big journalists, you, the big screenwriters, you, the big rock stars, the big restaurateurs, and you, the big politicians. I saw you, all of you. God help me, I was there with you. Again, maybe we didn't know to what degree, the magnitude of the awfulness. Not the rapes, not the shoving against the wall, not the potted plant. But we knew something. We knew something was bubbling under, something odious, something rotten. But, and this is as pathetic as it is true, what would you have us do? Who are we to tell? The authorities? What authorities? The press? Harvey owned the press. The internet? There was no internet or reasonable facsimile thereof. So we should have called the police and said what? Should we have reached out to some fantasy attorney general of movie land? Because that doesn't exist. Not to mention, most of the victims chose not to speak out, aside from sharing the grimy details with a close girlfriend or confidant. And if they discussed it with their representatives, agents, managers, who themselves feared the wrath of the big man, the agents and managers would tell them to keep it to themselves, because who knew the repercussions? That old saw, "You'll never work in this town again," came crawling back to putrid life like a reanimated cadaver in the late-night zombie flick. But yes, everyone knew someone who had been on the receiving end of lewd advances of him. or knew someone who knew someone. A few actress friends of mine told me stories of a ghastly hotel meeting, repugnant bathrobe shucking, of a loathsome massage request. And although they were rattled, they sort of laughed at his arrogance, how he actually believed that he could, the simple sight of his naked body, the doughy, carbuncled flesh, was going to get them in the mood. So I just believed it to be a grotesque display of power, a dude misreading the room and making a lame, if vile pass. It was all much easier to believe that. It was much easier for all of us to believe that. Because here's where the slither meets the slime. Harvey was showing us the best of times. He was making our movies. He was throwing the biggest parties, taking us to the Golden Globes, introducing us to the most amazing people, meeting with Vice President Gore, clubbing with Quentin and Uma, drinks with Salman Rushdie and Ray Fiennes, dinners with Mick Jagger and Warren freaking Beatty. The most epic Oscar weekends. They seemed to last for weeks. Sundance, Cannes, Toronto, Telluride, Berlin, Venice, private jets. Stretch limousines, Springsteen shows. Hell, Harvey took me to St. Bart's for Christmas for 12 days. I was a broke-ass kid from Boston who had never even heard of St. Bart's before he booked my travel. Once he got me tickets to 7 of the hottest Broadway shows in 1 week so I could take a new girlfriend on a dazzling tour of the theater. He got me seats on the 40-yard line of the Super Bowl when the Patriots were playing the Packers in New Orleans. He even got me a hotel room, which was impossible to get that weekend. He gave, and he gave, and he gave, and he gave. He had a monarch's volcanic generosity when it came to those within his circle, and a mafia don's fervent need for abject loyalty. But never mind us. What was he doing for the culture? Making stunningly splendid films at a time when everyone else was cranking out simpering Independence Day ripoffs. It was glorious, all of it. So what if he was coming on a little strong to some of the young models who had moved mountains to get into one of his parties? So what if he was exposing himself in a 5-star hotel room like a cartoon flasher out of Mad Magazine? Who are we to call foul? Golden geese don't come along too often in one's life. Which goes back to my original point. Stop it. Everyone effing knew. But everybody was just having too good of a time and doing remarkable work, making remarkable movies. As the old joke goes, we needed the eggs. Okay, maybe we didn't need them, but we really, 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 really liked them eggs. And so we were willing to overlook what the golden goose was up to in the murky shadows behind the barn. And for that, I'm eternally sorry. To all of the women that had to suffer this, I'm eternally sorry. I worked with Mira and Rosanna and Lysette. I know Rose and Ashley and Claire. I've known them for years. Their courage only hangs a lantern on my shame. And I'm eternally sorry for those who suffered in silence all this time and have chosen to remain silent today. I mostly lost touch with the brothers by the early 2000s for no specific reason. Just there were other jobs, other studios. But a few months ago, Harvey called me out of the blue to talk about the bygone days, to talk about how great it would be if we could get some of the gang back together to make a movie. I think he must have known then that the noose was tightening. There was a wistfulness to him that I'd never heard before, a melancholy. It most assuredly had a walking to the gallows feel. When I hung up, I wondered, what the heck was that all about? In a few short weeks, I would know. It was the condemned man simply wanting to comb some of the ruins of his old stomping grounds one last time. So, yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry and ashamed. Because, in the end, I was complicit. I didn't say crap. I didn't do crap. Harvey was nothing but wonderful to me, so I reaped the rewards and I kept my mouth shut. And for that, once again, I'm sorry. But you should be sorry, too, with all these victims speaking up to tell their tales. Shouldn't those who witnessed it from the sidelines do the same, instead of retreating to the cowardly confines of faux outrage? Doesn't being a bystander bring with it the responsibility of telling the truth, however personally disgraceful it might be? You know who you are. You know what you knew. And do you know how I knew what you knew? Because I was there with you. I saw you. And because everyone effing knew. It's strange because I have a lot of respect for what he wrote, because he said, not only am I ashamed that I just took the money and shut my mouth, he said, I'm sickened now by this next violation, and that is of the people who knew and say they don't.
This is the screenwriter who was talking about his experience with the Weinstein company.
Who wrote, that was one of the most powerful things I've ever read.
And he's a screenwriter.
He's a screenwriter. It was beautifully written.
It was really well done.
Beautifully written.
It's interesting because we've heard this from a lot of people inside Hollywood about Weinstein, in that a lot of people knew he was cheating on his wife. A lot of people knew he was a real dirtbag. In many ways in business, he screamed at people. He abused them verbally. And everyone kind of knew about that stuff. And people, kind of knew that he would put young 22-year-old models in a position in which they'd kind of have to have a choice between their career and a very unpleasant experience with a large fat guy in a robe. But again, that's different than obviously the really high-end stuff. We're talking about rape in some of these cases. I wonder, however, if some of him being a jerk in so many other ways shielded him.
Because so I talked to a friend of mine in Hollywood yesterday, and I said, come on, dude. Come on. You knew. And he said, honestly, we didn't. And I said, come on. He said, Glenn, I'm telling you the truth. We thought he was the biggest slimy dirtbag. He said, we knew he was a serial cheater on his wife. We knew that he would proposition everybody and anything. He said, we even knew that he would be with hookers and things like that. He said, we all knew he was a guy you did not want to be around. He said, but there's a difference between consensual and not consensual. He said, we knew that he was a dirtbag. He said, but everything that we would ever hear either came out in a settlement, and we would go, okay, well, the court system is working this out. They're working this out. Or we would hear it third hand. He said, so what are we supposed to do?
Right.
Tweet, hey, I've heard third hand that this is happening.
That this multimillionaire is a rapist.
Right.
Like you can't do that. By the way, you shouldn't do that, right? I mean, you don't just tweet accusations against some guy you heard third hand. I think the other part of that, too, is that because he was such a bad guy and had so many enemies, it was probably more believable that the worst of it wasn't true. Sure. That he had these enemies that would accuse him of things that were false, and that probably added to it as well.